suggestions, maybe UK-Chinese relations after the Sunday Times story yesterday. You might want to ask about dangerous dogs. They're back in the news as well today. The PCS union says that Keir Starmer has gone back on too many pledges and isn't radical enough. And Jonathan Gullis, who's with us on the panel tonight, he's called to ban those with poor exam results from getting a student loan. You might want to ask about that and many other things besides. So, on the panel with me tonight, Emily Thornberry, Labour Shadow Attorney General, MP for Islington South and Finsbury. As I said, Jonathan Gullis, Conservative MP for Stoke-On-Trent North. David Aaronovitch, the broadcaster, author and journalist. And Zoe Strimpel, a columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. You know how to get in touch with us, 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 and you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and of course, watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's go to our first caller. It's Chris in Croydon. Hello, Chris.
Oh, good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Yes, my question is a very topical one. Should dog ownership be an unqualified right?
An unqualified right. Should dog ownership be an unqualified right? Always good to have a very short question to the point. Sola Braverman, the Home Secretary, has sought advice on banning the American Bully XL breed after an 11-year-old girl was seriously injured by one in Birmingham on Saturday. Meanwhile, an LBC analysis has found that 100,000 people have been hospitalised over the past 15 years after attacks by dangerous dogs. Emily Thornberry.
Well, at the moment, it is an unqualified right. You're not allowed to have dogs and abuse them. So there are certainly rules around that. But I think that there are certain dogs that are clearly just beyond the pale. And I think that dogs that are bred in America to be absolutely enormous, whose first reaction is to attack people, should be rounded up. And people should not be allowed to have them. I think they should be put down. I think they're dangerous. I don't think that we should have one more child, one more person attacked by these dogs. I think that it should have happened a long time ago, and I can't see any reason why we need to do any sort of consultation on it now. I think it's perfectly clear that they are dangerous and that we shouldn't have them. And yeah, just get on with it, is my view.
Just this breed? Because, there are plenty of other examples of dog attacks that are not this particular breed. Staffies. When I was growing up, I always thought of Alsatians as really dangerous dogs, yet people now think that they're sort of nice, cuddly dogs.
I understand that. There are, the argument always goes that there aren't bad dogs, there are just bad owners, but I think there are certainly, in certain cases, there are bad dogs, and these ones are bad dogs, and they should be rounded up, and we should not have them.
Zoe.
Well, I think this is a bigger issue, actually, which is partly kind of social and cultural, which is that I've noticed just in general, I think people have sort of lost track of the fact that they are dogs, they are animals, and as much as we want animal rights and we like dogs, and dogs are a very important part of British culture and have been since the Victorian period and before, they're still they are subservient to humans. So if they harm humans or if they threaten humans as children or grown-ups, then there shouldn't be any agonizing whatsoever about what should be done. So I think that these American bullies are just this kind of bizarre outcropping of a complete failure of sort of basic common sense as well as actually humanity. They're a weird sort of vanity thing, I think, that these originating with certain types of American like rappers or something that, they're status symbols. So they have nothing to do with sort of the cozy pet thing, but they've somehow morphed into that. I think there's people are picking up the wrong idea about what dogs are from TikTok videos or social media or Instagram, and they think that a sort of grimace is a sort of cute thing when actually it's a sort of, so they can't even recognize when a dog is actually about to be dangerous. So I think it absolutely is the dog. I think it's also the owner, and it should be extended much more widely than just this breed. Any owner with a dog that even remotely threatens someone should be held maximum accountable. I'm seeing increasingly in various public spaces, people with really menacing looking dogs, huge dogs, and people are frightened and they're off the leash, and it's ruining those people's sense of safety on the heath. And we don't let humans go around intimidating other humans, or we're not supposed to. So I don't understand why there's this sort of sense of, well, that's fine with dogs. And just a final thought, I wonder if there's something to be learned from, gun permits. I mean, I would rather not, because it's really nice if people can have a cute dog. But obviously, with some kinds of dogs, we are talking about things that are as lethal to humans as guns. So maybe there does need to be a permit system.
David Aaronovitch, I'm sure there are examples of a Jack Russell or a Labrador sort of causing injury to people. I mean, nobody would suggest that those dogs should be put down, would they?
No, I mean, we were saying just before we came on that we're revisiting really old territory. I mean, I was a journalist at the time when the first Dangerous Dogs Act, actually wasn't the first, there was one back in, I think, 1837. We've had several, but one way or another, in recent history, 1989, then again in 1991, I can only presume that those acts specified specific breeds which are not now covered by the Act. What was interesting was, and you'll remember this very well, you all also remember it very well, was the Dangerous Dogs Act was quickly seen by a whole lot of people, or said to be, a classic example of bad legislation prepared in panic. I never quite understood why it became so unpopular, but I think one of the reasons was that it actually failed to control the number of dog incidents that there were, whilst actually having the sort of rather unfortunate effect of having dogs taken away from their owners, dogs who hadn't necessarily done anything, from owners who had been careful despite the fact that their dogs hadn't done anything. As an immediate past dog owner myself, our last dog actually died this summer and so on, but was a relatively smaller dog. I've always been incredibly worried about certain breeds on Hampstead Heath, but I've never been clear whether that was just my my neuralgia or an actual threat. You hear all the time about threats and so on, and then don't actually kind of see them. On the other hand, if having dragons was legal, etc., and dragons on Hampstead, we wouldn't kind of say, well, actually, it's the owners that are responsible, not the dragon. We'd say, well, anything that kind of has those many teeth and breathes fire, etc., is slightly problematic, and maybe we should do something about it. So I think one thing that we could do is require all dogs to be chipped. Otherwise, they can't be.
There is a requirement for that already.
Yeah, but they're not done. It's not done sufficiently. It's not kind of. We don't enforce it. So we actually would have. But that's the other problem. If you're going to have these laws, the problem is you've got to have the capacity to actually enforce them. It may be easier, actually, though I doubt whether it would work in the longer term, to just ban this other breed, add it to the kind of list of prescribed dogs, and see how we get on with it.
Jonathan Gullis, isn't there a knee-jerk reaction in society now that, well, whenever anything goes wrong, it needs to be one example, and the immediate reaction is, well, we've got to ban it?
Well, to be fair, with the American Bully dog, obviously we've had 9 deaths linked to this dog, 3 with children, which is actually extremely high compared to other breeds. So I do think it's perfectly fine, as Emily says, to not need a consultation with this particular breed. I think we just add it to the list, because ultimately it is clearly causing chaos, and owners are seemingly unable to control this breed as well, and that's why, in part, the Dangerous Dogs Act. You are correct, though, that there obviously are other breeds. We do obviously have the laws in place that if a particular dog is out of control and does harm others, that obviously enforcement can happen, that dog be put down. Look, I've got a Cavachon and a Cavapouchon, Bella and Bailey, and we deliberately looked up for dogs that were going to be friendly with children. I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and even then, even though they've grown up with,
they just sound friendly, don't they?
They sound friendly. Well, they are friendly. They are big babies to me, and they're fluffy babies, I must confess, is what I call them. But at the end of the day, even when I'm in the house, I'm very mindful of the kids being near the dogs. Bella, as small as she is still going to growl if William, my 1-year-old, thinks it's okay to try and poke her eye. And obviously, she's going to instinctively react if I'm not watching. So even with a breed that is ultimately brought up friendly with dogs, even though we've done all the dog training you can possibly do, the chips included, the works, ultimately we have to take those responsibilities in place. So I think that a consultation on other breeds may well be needed, but with this particular one, just add it to the list. We don't need a consultation on everything. I'm bored of consultations from government. Just crack on and do things.
Should we return to a system where there is some sort of licensing system to enable people to have dogs? Because it is a huge responsibility, and the overwhelming majority of people do take those responsibilities seriously. But there seem to be a growing number of dog owners who seem to think that the rules don't apply to them.
Well, look, I love watching your videos, Ian, of your little pup that's been introduced to your household and how you've done that gradually with your existing dog. Of course, the same with us when we brought the children home, having a week away so the kids could establish themselves in the house. house, allowing the dogs to come up every now and again, but always under monitor, always on the lead as well, to make sure they built that relationship with, say, my son and my daughter. And I think that I don't want to have to get to a place of licensing. I don't want more bureaucracy and regulation. I just think people should be responsible, and if they're not responsible, then throw the rule book at them, where there's plenty of existing laws to punish bad dog owners. Let's use those existing laws without having to create more layers of bureaucracy, which I don't actually think will benefit. We have obviously strict rules about how parents should look after their children, and yet we see tragic incidences where children are being abused or, God forbid, killed by the people who are meant to look after them and love them. So that would be my concern.
Dog owners should be really scared when they buy a potentially dangerous or menacing breed that their dog will harm or threaten other humans.
But that's what I don't understand. Why does anyone want to own a dog that is seen as dangerous?
Status. They think they have this perverted idea of what cute is. I mean, there's all sorts. I mean, the Bully XL is the most hideous dog. It's like a monster, and yet it's like taken off in popularity. But owners should be terrified that their dog will harm or menace anyone else, and they just clearly aren't, because we are a dog mad nation, and people just aren't sufficiently aware that it's not okay for a dog to harm or threaten another person, even if it's a cuddly Labrador. If your Labrador suddenly has a random attack, too bad, you're massively in trouble, as well as needing to put the dog down, I think.
Is this a macho thing going on here, that it's seen as a sign of your masculinity if you own one of these dogs?
Or your lack of masculinity, perhaps. Just making up for a lack of masculinity.
That's probably accurate.
I'm afraid I'm too effeminate to know.
You did say that in quite an effeminate way, to be fair.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's not something I particularly understand, and I'm not even going to pretend I do. I don't really. I've never even seen one of these things, although I gather they exist. I am careful around.
But they're trophies, aren't they? It's like the Staffy used to be the trophy of what people would describe as
but you know, there's I've seen a few Staffies. The people who love their Staffordshire Bull Terriers, they absolutely love them. They absolutely swear the sweetness of their nature. The problem with them is, if something does happen, they're so strong, their jaws are so strong, their shoulders are so strong, that you can't actually detach them from whatever it is they've decided to grant.
Also, they terrify everyone around them. I mean, it's like it's a liability.
They do.
Whether they're on the leash or not, people are made uncomfortable.
See, this is the joy of having a miniature schnauzer, because if he gets something in his mouth, I just pull his jaws open and he lets me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but one of those big schnauzers, that's a different matter altogether.
I don't
giant
want a
schnauzer.
I don't want a giant one.
And the final thing, though, isn't it the case with a lot of these dangerous breeds and these overbred dogs that it's actually terrible for them, even on an animal rights level, because they're bred in these mad ways that mean they can barely function physically, but they can be...
Well, we're not going to devote this whole hour to dogs, but we are going to devote the next hour to a conversation on dangerous dogs. So if you've got strong views on that, do stay listening, and we'll hear them after 9 o'clock. Lots more questions to come here on Cross Question. It's 8:15.
LBC Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet @LBC.
With us on the panel tonight, Emily Thornberry, Jonathan Gullis, David Aaronovitch and Zoe Strimpel. I think this question is mainly directed at Jonathan, but everybody else is going to have a view on this. Lee's in Bristol. Hello, Lee.
Hi, Iain. Basically, I was going to talk about something else, but because of the dog situation that you've been talking about, I'd like to talk about that, if that's okay.
No, it's not allowed. We've just done that. So you asked what you were going to talk about.
Right. Basically, why are low-level students denied university placements?
Now, the new Conservative group of Tory MPs has released a new report co-authored by Jonathan Gullis, who's with us on the panel, which suggests that pupils who fail their maths GCSE or only get 3 grade E's in their A-level results should not be eligible to get a student loan. Jonathan, what's the logic there?
The logic is that university, of course, is one option, but actually we want to make sure we have a better funded further education, particularly in apprenticeships, because we ultimately believe that's the way that you're going to really improve social mobility. I don't think it's unfair to ask for a grade 4 old money C- in English and Maths at GCSE and 3 E's at A-level in order to be able to access student loan, which is taxpayer funded up front, in order to access university. This would impact around about 10% of the current student population at university. If those students went into further educational apprenticeships, that'd be a £1.8 billion boost to that particular sector. And with the reforms that we've talked about alongside increasing the levy transfer to 35%, making sure that actually things like welfare, so at the moment, if an under 19-year-old whose household has got child benefit, if they go to A-levels, it stays. If they go to an apprenticeship, it goes. We're saying, actually, no, if you go to an apprenticeship, that child benefit should remain in place for anyone under the age of 19. And it's firmly something I believe in. Look, I'm the co-chair of the APPG for apprenticeships. I've got 2 in my office working in Westminster because I firmly believe this is going to be a huge way forward. And we want to level the playing field so it's not firmly tilted always to higher education, but actually we have a non-gold standard in just university. Germany, 54% of young people go on to an apprenticeship. It's only 10% in this country. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's good enough, and it won't deliver level
And
enough.
you speak as a former teacher, but why have you singled out maths? You said pupils who fail their maths GCSE or only get 3 grade E's in their A-level results shouldn't be eligible to get student loans. Why not say, well, I mean, isn't English...
It is English and Maths. The report does say both English and Maths at grade 4 is needed. Ultimately, look, if you don't get a grade 4 in English and Maths, you have to, when you're doing your A-levels, resit those anyway. So, and again, if you can't get 3 E's at university, which at the moment is about 2,740 pupils in the existing university system at this moment in time, then I would think it's fair to say that university isn't probably the right option. What we want to do is make it much more accessible to go on to apprenticeships. 5%, for example, of low-income students from low-income households are doing degree apprenticeships. That's simply not good enough. 30% of small businesses, however, are actually picking up students who haven't got a pass in their English or their maths. They're going to give them a life skill, they're going to give them a trade. We need welders, we need plumbers, we need bricklayers, we need electricians. We can't keep relying on mass migration to fill these vacancies. We should be skilling up our own workforce.
But what effect would this have on the university system? Because if numbers fall by 10%, that's going to mean that 1 or 2 universities would go out of business, presumably.
Well, we actually offer the opportunity for some universities in the report to create themselves as new institutes of technology so that they can move with the ever-moving market, to actually pitch themselves in a slightly different way. But ultimately, as I say, we've made university, so for some bizarre reason, the gold standard. Labour introducing, obviously, this 50% arbitrary target under Tony Blair to go to university is not always the right option for people. We haven't valued enough our further education and skills sector, and that's why I want to see the balance readdressed.
David Aaronovitch.
I'm not sure I understand what problem you're trying to address here. I just don't get it. If you want to significantly boost the FE sector, which you have slashed in the most, to the most significant level, you will say that was necessary because it was necessary after 2010, then in that case, that's what you do, build it up. 50%, if 50% of people do go to HE, and it's not that many at the moment, 50% don't. You've still got that 50% who you can try and push towards FE. It's not that, actually, and the mass migration point's completely relevant here. I mean, you just kind of bung that in order to kind of get a little bit of applause.
David, as a former Euro-communist, I'm not surprised you're saying that, but that's fine.
The word former is quite important there.
So still communist?
Because I was actually 21 and I'm now 69. I am 69. I think the kind of succeeding 48 years I'm allowed to have kind of tempered my views slightly. But when you get to my age, you'll have tempered your views as well, and you might have come back to planet Earth, Jonathan.
Why are you sneering at the idea that we'd want more people to go into further education? This metropolitan elitist idea that somehow university is the be-all and end-all is absolutely for the birds. What we want to see is more kids get into skilled qualifications. We need more welders and more bricklayers. We've come up with a system and ideas, fully costed, in our 70-point plan, which is something you haven't read, let's be perfectly honest, actually outlining a very clear proposal of how we can readdress the balance, how we can make sure that graduates aren't going in to do degrees that are ultimately never going to make them earn more money than the apprentices.
Okay. Ian, he's on automatic pilot now.
No.
I mean, so
I'm talking from lived experience, David. I actually used to be a teacher on the front line. I was a trade union rep also during that time as well. Don't lecture me about education when I actually spent 8.5 years, day in, day out, in classrooms in state secondary schools.
Jonathan, no one can talk to you about education, let alone lecture you about education. Clearly, that kind of spirit you learned in the classroom of telling your students what they should think is not something you've lost.
The teacher is the expert in the room. The teacher is the expert in the room. That's how teaching works.
But my suggestion to you is forget the business about trying to penalise students who want to go into higher education.
No one's penalising students.
Yes, you are. That's what you're asking to do.
3E's A-level is a pass.
Forget that. Boost the FE sector. Boost the apprenticeship. Forget the business about attacking migration, because in the long term you're going to require that migration anyway, because we're going to have fewer young people in the population. That's the situation, demographic situation for us. Address the real problems and stop kind of trying to hit the hot buttons for a section of the electorate, really, that's never going to get you back into power.
Okay, let's bring in Emily.
Good Lord.
It's very calm.
Yes, well, let's try and calm down a bit, shall we? Let's pull apart this big bundle of slogans that we've heard as to what this policy really is. I think we all agree that we need to skill up our population more than we do at the moment. We must do much more work on that. That everyone should have a value, that we should be able to play to people's strengths, that they should be able to be given a proper future, that they should be able to contribute, that they should be able to stand on their own 2 feet, support themselves and their family, and be given options. Right? We all agree on that. So why are you taking away options from some people? If some people want to go to university and they've crashed out in their A-levels, so they haven't done as well as everyone was expecting, let us say, why take away why put a cap on aspiration if people want to go to university and they have the ambition to do it?
Because a lot of them drop out.
Yes. Well, yes, and some people will drop out who have higher results than that. You'll have all kinds of people who won't be able to cope with university for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it is because they find it too academically challenging, but there's a whole load of other reasons too. So why put an arbitrary cap on that?
I think if you have an academic institution, and this is very out of date now, so I'm not going to quote the actual one, but there was a university in the last 10 years that had a dropout rate in the first year of 25%, a publicly funded university. Now, I would say that academic institution needed to have a jolly good look at itself and decide whether it was actually offering the right courses for the right students.
But do you know that those are linked to those students who Jonathan is talking about?
I've no idea.
Or is that
absolutely no idea?
Well, if we have no idea, then we can't tell whether or not this addresses the problem.
But isn't there a real point here about the apprenticeship issue? I actually genuinely think that regardless of whether it is penalising or not to offer a government taxpayer subsidised loan to people who show absolutely zero inclination towards academia. The problem with that, as it stands, is that it isn't clear what else they're going to be doing. It does feel a little bit like they're being forced down their hopes of social mobility or whatever it else or ambition. But I just don't understand why. I think it's a big mistake, basically, that the university remains the gold standard for everyone. Yeah. And I think people are aware of this, and people do think we need people to be, there should be dignity in going to an apprenticeship route instead.
But isn't that the answer? Actually, isn't that the answer? Isn't the answer, in fact, that we should have more apprenticeships, that there should be more options for people? That doesn't mean saying, here are all these options, But by the way, you lot aren't allowed to...
Emily, the report itself makes it very clear about all the apprenticeship opportunities, about reforming the levy, about improving the funding for medium-sized businesses to match small businesses as well.
Lion's share of the conversation in this answer.
Just let me finish. Let's see if I can remember what the sentence was. What I was trying to say was that, I think that we should give youngsters options, and at the moment they don't have enough options because there aren't enough apprenticeships out there. There isn't enough training, a lot of kids won't necessarily know what am I going to do next. What am I going to do? Well, I don't know. Oh, well, let's go to college. Now, I appreciate that may well be the case in relation to a lot of youngsters, including those who may have an A in A-level maths and who, if they had a possibility of doing an apprenticeship of the right sort, would take that instead. Right. But there are not those options there. And so to kind of be pointing at one particular group and be saying, well, you're part of the problem. You're definitely part of the problem. We'll punish you, we'll section off you, and we will say to you, you can't go to university. I mean, really, what is this about?
Is there anyone around this table who got an E at A-level? I did. In economics, which all my listeners would be able to guess that I got.
How on earth did you manage to get an E in economics? Because in our time, it was multiple choice.
One of the papers was multiple choice.
No. It was the first year my school had done economics, and we were the guinea pigs.
Crap teaching.
No, it's very good teaching, actually. But the syllabus, it was all out of date. It was all about Keynesian stuff, nothing about monetarism. This is 1980. I think, why are we learning about this? Thatcher is imposing monetary policies, so why aren't we learning about that?
So you couldn't be bothered to learn it because you didn't agree with it?
I didn't think it was really appropriate.
Well, it hasn't done you any harm.
It hasn't done me any harm. I'm here, aren't I? Right, we're going to do a quick question now.
If you paid more attention, you might have ended up being a Labour supporter instead of a Tory. Think how different your life would have been.
I think it probably is now.
You think he is?
Yeah.
Okay.
You just continue talking about me while we go on to another question. I want to go to... actually, this is a follow-on on the last one from Fiona in Huddersfield, a text question. I'm a teacher on the front line and I've been teaching for 25 years and still am. You're penalising students from a disadvantaged background. How many children from Eton are going to be encouraged to do an apprenticeship? Jonathan.
Exactly.
It's just complete nonsense. Again, what we're saying is that young people, and again, I've given you the figure, 2,740 people who are currently in a degree didn't get 3 E's at A-level. That is the lowest pass mark you can get. I don't think it's unfair to ask the taxpayer to subsidise people who have actually passed their A-level. Ultimately, what we're saying is apprenticeships, we agree with Emily, which is why I find it weird Labour's been against the policy today, but I haven't even read the actual packet that we're offering, because ultimately we're saying there aren't enough apprenticeships, businesses haven't been incentivised. When you've got a student loan budget of £10 billion a year, 3 times the size of the apprenticeship budget, then that shows that there is a over-leaning to higher education. We want young kids from disadvantaged backgrounds to get on in life, whether that be an apprenticeship, a degree apprenticeship or university. And if a kid from Eton wants to go and do a degree apprenticeship or an apprenticeship, crack on and do it.
So why are you just slicing off those who've had E's? If you want to,
Emily,
if you want to change the budget as much as you just claim, then presumably nobody who got less than a B should be able to go to university. If you want to change the money around, is that really your argument?
We've said 3 E's, Emily.
No.
3 E's at A-level.
What you have just said is that so much money is spent on degrees and not enough is spent on apprenticeships. So if you want to equalise it out, why not take this to its logical conclusion and just ban anyone from university who's got less than a B?
Because an E is an accepted pass rate by Ofqual, and therefore we accept that E is a pass at A-level. Ultimately, what we want is to make sure young people have opportunities. I represent a constituency in Stoke-On-Trent, North Kids Grove and Talk, that was the 7th worst in England for kids going on to higher education, and it's in the bottom 20% for kids getting a level 3-4 qualification. As we heard earlier, the offer and understanding about apprenticeships isn't good enough. 64% of teachers surveyed by City AM said that they wouldn't recommend doing a degree apprenticeship. 48% of students who logged on to UCAS...
a politician or commentator who does not agree with that. I don't know a single one. This has been the staple talk for the last 2 decades, is how we boost apprenticeships and how we boost vocation. Your party has been in power for 13 years. 13
and
years.
has had done a lot on apprenticeships, but except that when the levy came in, it had a negative impact, which is again mentioned in the report, which is why we want to reform the levy.
We are talking about it like it's literally illegal.
Final word to Zoe.
It's not going to be illegal for students who completely flunk their A-levels to go to university. They just can't have... They'll have to fund... In the US, it's completely normal for families to save up to kill themselves.
Well, we don't want that.
Yeah,
we may not want that, but we're talking...
We are
okay, but that's an interesting division. And we're talking about this as if the government is going to make it illegal for these people to go. So I think it is fair to ask these questions.
You're making it impossible for them to go.
Right, we're going to move on to a very different
it's
subject
still, no, it's not
in
impossible.
just a few moments' time. It's 8:31. Let's get the news headlines on LBC from Tim Daly while I go and research the Laffer curve.
LBC has found more than 100,000 people have been sent to hospital for dog attacks over the last 15 years. Earlier today, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, also told us a change is needed in relation to American Bully XL dogs after one attacked an 11-year-old girl in Birmingham. The Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, is insisting China represents a systemic challenge to the UK. But some Tory backbenchers are calling for a harsher line to be taken on the activities of Beijing. And a further 9,100 Wilko employees will be made redundant by early October. The administrators at PwC failed to reach a deal to save any significant part of the retailer after its collapse. LBC weather, rain moving to the southeast, leading to clearer and cooler conditions, and an overnight low of 9 degrees.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Hi, I'm the Keir Starmer of radio.
Straight to the point.
If they're prepared to shoot each other to get on a boat, I don't know if they want them coming to this country.
Uncompromising.
They're incompetent.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
I've done a complete U-turn on this.
Listen on your radio and on Global Player. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:35. Round the table with me on Cross Question, Emily Thornberry, Labour Shadow Attorney General, Jonathan Gullis, Conservative MP for Stoke-On-Trent North, David Aaronovitch, broadcaster and journalist, and Zoe Strimpel, columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. Our next question is a text question from Jamie in Ruislip. I'm going to speak to a school in Ruislip. No, Harrow's near Ruislip, isn't it? On Friday. Anyway, right. The question is, if union leaders don't trust Keir Starmer not to break his promises, why should we? And this is on the back of the General Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Union, Mark Sawatka, exclusively telling LBC that someone who's abandoned pledges in the way he says Keir Starmer has since his 2020 leadership election is not in a, quote, not in a position to ask to be trusted. And he also said that Keir Starmer needs to offer a real radical vision. David Aaronovitch.
Yeah, I mean, unions are one thing and political parties are another, particularly political parties of government. Mark Sawatka is a man of the radical left in the union he represents his members. And he obviously wants Keir Starmer to commit to a whole series of policies which Labour's very reluctant to do. Largely because if Labour takes power, let's say next autumn, it's going to face an economic situation. In fact, the Conservatives, if they get re-elected, an economic situation, a kind of almost unfunded forward plan for public expenditure, underfunded one. I mean, just the NHS plan for personnel alone is not costed through properly and is not affordable. So under those circumstances, it seems wise for Labour not to make too many pledges that it then cannot keep. So probably what Starmer's doing in his rather ruthless way is making sure that he comes to power with minimum pledges, a bit like Tony Blair did actually in 1997, and then can say after a couple of years, we've done more than you expected us to and more than we thought we were able to do if the situation improves. So his mistake, you could argue. So the thing that Sawatka's really talking about is why then make all these big pledges when you stand to be leader. Well, when you stand to be leader of a party, you've got to get the members of the party to vote for you. And they want a certain set of things. So you appeal to the people who used to support Jeremy Corbyn partly to support you. And then, of course, those pledges can't be pushed through. So you then have to get rid of them before the election. If you remember, poor old Nick Clegg went into the election of 2010 with the pledge to abolish tuition fees. It was an impossible pledge, could never be met in government, but he didn't expect to be in government. Found himself in government, found himself completely unable to keep the pledge, and reap the reward partially at the 2015 election. You don't want to be in that position. So what Starmer's doing is perfectly sensible politics, but it is certainly true that he's reneged on the pledges he made to the Labour Party. Well, I thought those pledges were a mistake when he made them, so I'm pretty glad that he's reneged upon them. Is he trustworthy? What do you want to trust him to do, to run the country properly, or do you want to trust him to maintain pledges that were impossible?
If memory serves correctly, Emily, you were a candidate in that leadership election against Keir Starmer. When he made these pledges, did you think to yourself, well, don't know what you're doing that for because you'll never be able to deliver on them?
I think I'd left about a week before.
That's not. I'm not letting you off.
I think I was on my way to Italy.
That'll be a yes.
So that's sort of yes.
So I think that the fact is that Keir's core values haven't changed. But, you'll remember it was a year ago today, I think, that the Tory Prime Minister of the time was hell-bent on crashing the economy, which is what she successfully did. And we've had, since then, the British economy has been in a terrible mess. We've had, and that's on top of years and years of austerity, years of our public services being starved of the sort of cash that was necessary in order to keep them in any sort of state. And we don't know what's going to happen. Not a single vote has been cast yet. But if there is there will be a general election in the next year. And if we're given the opportunity to serve, we will have a heck of a job in front of us.
But going back to the question, though, if union leaders don't trust Keir Starmer not to break his promises, why should we? It's a perfectly fair question.
Well, I think that in the end, if you look at what happened recently when we had our debate over policy in Nottingham that happened in July, we had the unions, we had trade union members, we had Labour Party members, we had the front bench, all of us came together and we talked through what our policy platform ought to be, and we came to an agreement. So, there's some quite eye-catching quotes here, but in the end, what's the essence of Keir is that he wants to have a fairer and more equal society. He wants us to repair the damage.
So does everyone.
Wait a minute, that the Tories have done. But he's not an ideologue. He's practical. And as I say, our experience of Liz Truss, surely, as a country, shows that the last thing you want is an ideologue who just simply, thinks, right, this is the right thing to do, and no matter what what happens, just carries on and takes our country and careers us over.
So basically, what the implication of what you're saying is that the Labour Party might as well not have a manifesto next time, because they'll feel free to just break every promise, just as Keir Starmer did after the leadership election.
I think that it's quite. I mean, let me take you to what I think is an absolute cornerstone of our policies, which is that we must change our economy. Fundamentally, we have to grow it. And that means that we must invest.
Nobody disagrees with that.
Well, you'll find that the Conservatives disagree with this.
Well, Liz Truss certainly didn't. That was her main thing, wasn't it, about growing the economy?
But the way that we want to do it is we want to be able to invest. We will be quite clear about how we want to change our economy. We need to change the way in which we make energy forever. We want to be able to make it in this country. We want to lower bills forever. We want to insulate homes. We want there to be green jobs. We need to change the way that our economy is done fundamentally, and we will commit to borrowing £28 billion a year in order to invest in that, and we will change the regulatory regime in order to make it easier for private sector money to come in. Now that is the cornerstone of our policies, because only if we grow our economy will we have the money that we need to have in order to be able to invest in public services, because they have been starved for the last 13 years by this dreadful government.
Jonathan.
Well, I thought Emily did a really good job there of defending Sir Keir Starmer, who continuously flip-flops or U-turns on every position. And, of course, she was an expert in defending Jeremy Corbyn in the past, so I admire her tenacity there. The reality is that we've been on a constant journey with Sir Keir Starmer. He's on LBC saying that he supports ULEZ. Then we have the by-election, he's saying that it's time to pause it. Now it's being briefed out that he's against ULEZ altogether. We have it that he can't define what a woman is. Then he says 99.9% of women don't have a penises. Now a woman is an adult human female. I can't keep up with the constant changes in what Sir Keir Starmer stands for. And when I go out on doorsteps in Stoke-On-Trent, North Kidsgrove and talk, people, whilst they might like the idea of Labour, are very fearful of Sir Keir Starmer because they don't actually know what he really wants to do with the country, and fearful that anything he does say will simply be binned once they get into power. So it might be an idea to have a blank sheet of paper for a manifesto, but that isn't actually a way that you win government and you win a country over. You have to have a policy platform.
But all politicians' positions on different policies evolve over time. I mean, you I think, were a fan of Liz Truss.
Yeah.
Yet you're now having to defend Rishi Sunak's economic policy, which I suspect parts of you fundamentally disagree with. But you have to go on programmes like this and defend it.
Well, all I'd say is that Rishi Sunak's second pledge out of those 5 is to grow the economy, and what we're trying to do is make sure that obviously we get the economy in a good state. Well, actually, economic forecasts actually were upgraded, as you know, by the Office of National Statistics to say that we were the 3rd quickest to recover post the pandemic in the G7, despite Labour having spent a whole year telling us that we were the worst. So actually, so actually what we've seen is progress being made. We've had the announcement today of more investment from another manufacturer, adding on top of the massive investment that's already going down in the southwest as well. In Stoke-on-Trent, we've had 9,000 jobs created since 2015. We've had 500 Home Office jobs, up to 1,700 at Chatham Valley West, thanks to the record 17.6 million Kidsgrove Town deal. Reopened a sports centre that Labour closed, and they couldn't be bothered to spend £1 to save it. We've also got a £56 million levelling up fund, which is the largest of anywhere in the country.
People hate it when politicians come on this programme and just roll out lists, but I understand
they're important lists because
they're important for Stoke-on-Trent North. I get that, but they're nothing to do with the question that's been asked. So it's Strimpel.
Well, I'm going to sidestep the union question because
that is the question.
Well, I'm going to answer it in the roundabout way, the way all of the other panellists have, apart from David. For me, the fact that the union doesn't believe in a leader is actually a good sign. But I think the bigger question here, I think they've shown themselves, many unions, be completely unreasonable and far left, as David says, and bringing ideology that's completely inappropriate and outdated into the kind of middle of things. So that, for me, would be a black mark on Starmer. But I think this thing, Emily mentioned core values. I do think it's completely unclear to a normal person what those core values would be. But I don't think this is just and the flip-flopping has been insane with Starmer, not only on gender and the self-ID thing and what a woman is, but on ULEZ and on student loan. There's a lot of things, but I don't think this is actually just a problem with him. I think we have a huge problem with politics more widely. I actually couldn't tell you what Rishi Sunak's core values are. I couldn't tell you what the political philosophy of the Tories currently is. I don't think most people have the faintest clue what anybody's kind of guiding guiding principles are. So actually, I think what we're all kind of fighting against, it doesn't really matter. I mean, they're all going to be roughly, it's all just, there's no guts, there's no backbone, there's no coherent
And what you're
policy.
effectively saying is the word conviction has gone out of politics.
Well, I mean, conviction without intelligence is completely pointless. I'd rather have a Rishi who's clearly smart than a convinced Jeremy Corbyn, of course. But I think just anyone who's bothering to, so someone who, for instance, who would mount a robust defence of, I don't know, a less regulated economy might be interesting. Everywhere we turn, there's more and more regulation. That's, if people talk about growth, entirely on specific terms. What's underpinning the belief in growth? What is the economic idea here?
Well, I've just told you what the idea is when it comes to us and exactly what it is that we're going to do. And actually, it's. I mean, I appreciate that this is the narrative which is kind of, ricocheting around the Westminster. But it isn't true. We have a detailed plan for how we're going to grow the economy, and that is our mission number one.
But
we have to grow the economy.
Ricochet around the corridors of Westminster.
Well, only because I don't interrupt people like you when you say when you talk nonsense, Ian, which I'm doing now.
How have I talked nonsense?
Because we're saying there's no difference. All right, you didn't. But you're saying that there's no difference.
Hands up.
I know. I'm trying to be polite.
No,
it's okay.
The point is, Emily, though, that invariably, when a Labour frontbencher comes on this programme and is asked, well, OK, I mean, Rachel Reeves is a good example. She comes on once a month to do a phone-in with listeners, and every time she says, well, I'm not going to write my manifesto on your programme, Ian, understandably so. But you've got to give the electorate something to chew on. You've got to give them a broad direction of travel.
Okay, and that's why what Keir has said is that he's come out with these 5 missions that he's talked about, and is essentially saying we're not going to be able to deliver everything on these in the first year or 2 years. It may well be that a lot of these things need to be done if we're given the opportunity to serve over 2 periods. So, for example, I mean, in the mission that I'm involved in, which is the crime one, we want to halve violence against women and girls. Now, we can't do that overnight, but we have a series of ideas as to what it is that we're going to do, how we're going to improve things. At the moment, under this government, only 1.6% of rape cases that are reported to the police actually end up being prosecuted.
And to be fair, that is an area where detail has been given, which you can hear Jess Phillips talk about on my Iain Dale All Talk podcast this very week. Thank you for that, Emily. It's 8:48.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Filmed from the top deck of a bus in Birmingham, you see one of these XL bully dogs initially attacking a girl we subsequently know to be 11, and then, dear God, it suddenly starts chasing someone around a petrol forecourt. Amy in Harlow.
I was attacked on the 24th of August. The dog literally just attacked me. I jumped forward. She did jump on my leg. She penetrated. I got a level 3 bite. I managed to unlock my car and quickly get into my car.
Has the owner been contacted?
The owner was so rude. He didn't say sorry. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just kept walking down the street.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
We have Emily Thornberry, Jonathan Gullis, David Aaronovitch and Zoe Strimpel with us answering your questions. The next one is from Chris in Richmond. Hello, Chris.
Hello, evening panel. Jonathan, recently you've blamed voter apathy for the Tories' dire election performances. Is it really that, or is the government just simply not up to the job anymore?
Well, let's go to you, Jonathan.
Well, I always enjoy hearing the Daily Mirror from today quoted back at me. Actually, voter apathy is a real problem. There are a lot of voters at this moment in time. The polling shows that who are currently in the don't know column for when it comes to looking at either the Prime Minister or Sir Keir Starmer, when it comes to looking at Labour or the Conservatives. And I think that a lot of people have just checked out of politics themselves for now, because ultimately they've been struggling, obviously, with the cost of living. They've been worried about, obviously, what the events have been happening in Ukraine and how that could potentially impact, whether that be military or, obviously, in the supermarket shelves. So, yeah, I think voter apathy is a very real problem. I think both parties need to have a way of inspiring the public in the next election. And ultimately, whoever inspires the public most will win power when it comes to the voters.
Emily?
I mean, I've been on doorsteps up and down the country. I've, in fact, spent a couple of sessions in North Stoke speaking to constituents. And I think that what we have to be very careful to mind against is exactly what we were talking about a minute ago, which was people thinking, listening to journalists and commentators saying there is no difference between the two parties because there so is. And what we, as the Labour Party, have to do is we have to inspire people to understand that it doesn't have to be this way. There is another way. There is hope, and things can change, and they will change under a Labour government. And if we can give people that hope, then people will be prepared to vote left, and they will give us a chance. But, not a single vote has been cast yet, and that's our job. That's what we have to keep doing, is we have to go for it and persuade the public that there can be change.
Do you not feel, though, that the 15, 20-point Labour lead is 15, 20-point against the Conservatives rather than pro-Labour, that Keir Starmer hasn't inspired people and therefore a lot of people are feeling apathetic?
We know that we still have a long way to go. We believe that we have done well, we always knew after the 2019 election, good heavens, the Tories had an 80-seat majority. So for us to go from 80 seats behind to have a reasonable chance of winning the next election was going to be a heck of a feat. So we know that we have a long way to go. We are in the foothills. We have a good view from where we are, but we know that we still have a long way to go, and we will be working on it for the next year.
OK, Zoe.
I think the apathy is also, again, to do with something even worse than what we're talking about. I think it's there's on one hand the problem that it's the politicians' fault because nobody understands anything of what they're trying to do, and so it's all very well to talk about change, but what exactly is the nature of that change, and how will it be conducted, and how will it motivate people and satisfy their questions? But also, I think there's a thing where things to do with the economy, things to do with society, things to do with, again, the sheer amount of regulation and rules, and also this kind of skein of cultural politics that overlays everything, has made things so complicated and fed through so many different sort of lenses, and all the signals are scrambled, and people just don't want to engage because it's like, what are we even, what is holding our society together? What is it built on?
But is that the fault of the politicians themselves, that they're explaining things in a way that just ordinary voters don't relate to?
Well, either ordinary voters don't relate, but I think there's also a problem with the nature of the things that have to be explained, which is that they're really complicated, and it's a struggle for even people who spend their lives watching this stuff to understand what the heck is going on. But I think politicians also really insult the intelligence of the populace as well. And here I blame the current government for using sort of baby language, and especially this was terrible throughout COVID, but also just very sort of saccharine rhetoric that just insults people's intelligence. So I think the whole level of, somehow politicians have started to think that the way you address people is to sort of speak to them like they're idiots. That's one problem. So that's message over substance. But I think the substance itself is really hard to understand right now.
David.
Sometimes I just feel really, really ancient. I mean,
That's the second
this
time
must be
programme.
about exactly. This must be about the kind of 50th iteration of this particular form of argument that I've heard during my kind of political life, and it always happens. The people are apathetic; they don't like politicians. Blah, 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 blah. It's always said, and then an election result happens, and all of a sudden, all the commentariat turn around and reinterpret it in a completely kind of new way. It's obvious what's happening here, which is that Tory voters can't get behind the past Conservative governments. They think that it's probably time for a change, but they're not totally sure because change is slightly scary, although nothing like as scary as it was when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, which is going to be one of the major factors in Keir Starmer's favour, is that he doesn't scare people away, which means that people won't, and that incidentally has a knock-on effect for Liberal Democrats, because it means that people will be content to vote Liberal Democrats in seats that they can take for the Tories, and that means, I think, that the Tories are in for an extremely bad time, and so on, because their voters, they're not apathetic, Jonathan. They just don't want to vote for you, probably. At the
As we
next
saw in
election.
Selby and Ainsley. I mean, that was quite clear in that by-election, wasn't it?
Yeah, and whatever you think about it, they see the Johnson and Truss periods as having been disorganised and chaotic and terrible for Britain. That's the way that's what comes through the polls. So I think you've not done sufficient to deserve people giving you another term on top of the 3 that you've already had, and that's really what you're facing.
And one of our central questions is, what have they achieved? They've been in for 3 terms. What have they achieved? What is better about Britain since the Tories have been in?
No, the question is even simpler than that. The question for Labour at the next election, Keir Starmer looks straight down the camera and says, are you better off than you were 4 years ago or even 13 years ago?
Exactly.
Because there's very little answer to that.
Ian, there is a big answer. I won't rattle through the list again, but there's an awful lot that's happened in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk under 3 Conservative members of Parliament, getting investment after 70 years of Labour, who simply took voters for granted and assumed that they were cannon fodder when it came to election time.
And that might count in the old seat, but it's not going to count over the whole country.
I am not blind to the fact it's going to be a very challenging election. Every member of Parliament on the Conservative benches is going to be fighting for themselves. I personally think that the polls in my area are far closer than what the Labour Party think they are. I also think, actually, because I spend a lot of time on doors, there's an awful lot of apathy in my particular part of the world as well. Let's not forget, 1997, 4 million Tory voters sat at home, and that's the issue that we could face if we don't motivate those voters.
We've got our possibly weirdest ever fun question to get through now from Bill in Bournemouth. 2 huge wine tanks in Portugal burst over the weekend, causing 2 million litres of delicious red to spill down a street. And the screen's gone completely blank. No, it's come back. I, for one, would be grabbing a straw. Which food or drink would you most like to see cascading towards you? Zoe?
Cheese, I think.
That conjures up an image, doesn't it? Any particular...
Probably something in the domain of mozzarella or cheddar.
Right.
Yeah, hopefully with some
Jonathan?
bread.
Jammy Dodgers. Every time I buy them for the kids in the snack drawer, I seem to eat 3/4 of them myself.
David?
Whatever is least heavy. Really, I mean, I do not want to be smothered by food. I mean, I'm dying. This is not the epitaph I want.
Brussels sprouts, maybe, because you could escape from a.
Well, I think so. That's probably right. It can't be thick liquid, so it can't be yogurt or something.
No,
because you could drown in that quite easily. So I think Brussels sprouts is a good answer.
Emily,
strawberries covered in milk chocolate.
I'll definitely kill you.
It's sexy.
I'd like to die drowning in cheese.
Well, thank you very much for all of your answers tonight. The panel on tomorrow's cross question consists of the Conservative MP, former Cabinet Minister Sir Robert Buckland, Novara Media's Ash Sarkar, the Independent North of Tyne Mayor Jamie Driscoll, and journalist and political commentator Grant Tucker. So they'll be with me from 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to talk about dangerous dogs, because the Home Secretary is seeking urgent advice on banning the so-called lethal American Bully XL dogs. A statement comes after footage was posted online of an attack on an 11-year-old girl in Bordesley Green in Birmingham on Saturday. Is this something that should be at the top of our political agenda now? Should the government be banning maybe not just this breed of dangerous dog, but some others too? Or do you stick to the view, no, it's actually the owners that are at fault here? But as we've heard on Cross Question, it's not quite as simple as that, is it? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call here on LBC.
on your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock.